Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode.
Hello, Stefanie.
Hello, Sarah.
Hello, listeners. Thanks for joining us today.
And this episode is a two-parter. So today we're talking about fear of hunger. And next week, stay tuned for our conversation on fear of fullness.
Yes, we're looking at both sides of the coin, but it's the same coin, right, Steph?
It's the same quarter. Oh, you don't have that.
We don't have quarters.
Sorry.
That's why we go with coin because coin is internationally recognized. Yeah. Just on money note, our money's all going to be changing, of course, because we've lost our queen. So all our money has to change. We're going to have Charles's face on everything. Yeah.
What happens to the old money?
You've got to spend it.
It still circulates?
You've got to spend it. No, you have a date by which you've got to spend it.
Can you turn it in for?
No, you have to spend it.
That's not fair.
I know, it's not true either.
No.
you can help boost the economy, you never know. Anyway, but no, that's not true. Anyway, back to hunger. So, Steph, were you ever somebody who was scared of hunger, of being hungry? What was your relationship with hunger when you were struggling with food?
This is something I only think about now. At the time, I did not register it as fear of hunger, but it was. I didn't have a conscious fear of hunger. So it wasn't like, I can't get hungry because then I'll feel X. It was more when I got hungry, my body would have a freak out. It would get so scared. And fear is it's one of my primary states. And I, to this day, kind of feel that. Like if I get too hungry, I move into a somewhat of a fear state. That's not part of my logic or intellect. I can calm myself down. Like I know that I'm not restricting. I'm aware of that. But somewhere in my body, there was an alarm bell about that. And I think that I would eat and binge whenever I would tip into hunger a little bit, but I wasn't really aware of that. I had no insight into that. So it wasn't like it was something I was consciously avoiding. Now I know that. And it's something, I mean, I don't ever let myself get terribly hungry, but if I do, if it happens, I do notice that there's some part of me, and this actually has happened to me at night. So if I ever have woken up hungry, I almost wake up with a panic attack. And this is something I like only recently started to realize. And I have to go eat something in the middle of the night if I wake up hungry, because I will sit there and start like getting paranoid and I'll start getting a lot of anxiety. It really, like there's something deep there. Yeah, that's my experience with it. And that's how it still plays out a little bit.
Do you have a go-to food if you were to wake up in the middle of the night hungry? What would you go for? Or would it vary?
Let's see. So to me, it's like I'm tired and I just need that to go away. And the second that I eat and my belly has something inside of it, it's like good to go. So it's not about, what do I want? It's not about a craving or something delicious. It's what gets the job done. So usually for me, I just rip off a piece of bread and put a little peanut butter on it, eat it, drink water, go to bed. Like it's kind of that density. And I think the bread and the peanut butter have that quick boom effect in the stomach with the water on top. It's just like, okay, there's gravity in my belly now. I can calm down. And I do. And then I can go right back to sleep. Mm-hmm. It's typically that. Yeah.
The last time that happened to me, waking up in the night hungry, I had peanut butter on a bagel. He went for bread and peanut butter as well. So I would say that happens to me maybe sort of once a month, once every 6 weeks, that kind of time frame where I might wake up in the night, 1-2 o'clock, and I'm hungry. Feels like hunger. And I find in that moment, what I really want is some kind of bread. Quite often cheese is really appealing at that time. I'd like some bread and cheese. There's something that would be grounding, and with bananas. I'd like a banana. So quite often my go-to would be a bit of bread, a bit of cheese, and a banana if I was hungry in the middle of the night.
I'll try a banana next time. That doesn't speak to me at the moment. You know why though? Because I keep bananas in my fridge and they're cold and I don't want anything cold. I want something warm, warm, dense. And peanut butter is like, it's caloric density in a smaller volume, right? So I think that's why there's a tendency to go for that. And plus I think the texture and the sensation of the two things together are like have that quality. But I think that this comes from I don't know. What do you think? For me, I've always interpreted this as, referring back to our episode on trauma, like the physical trauma of dieting and or restricting, and to the degree that the degree I experienced that when I was 15, 16 years old, 17, my body still remembers that as trauma. And I think it's coded. That hunger is kind of coded alongside of trauma. And so there's a part of that my body just is like, it just won't, it doesn't want to let go of. And that's really deep. And I mean, I say to my husband sometimes, do you think this will ever go away? Like, do you think that it'll ever just be like, okay, we get it. Like, we're healed. Let's move on with our lives and not freak out when we're hungry. And I think, I mean, who knows? It has gotten less and less and less over time. And I certainly can tolerate a lot more hunger than I used to be able to tolerate before something like that would happen. I think it's maybe dependent on my states of vulnerability too, because this will be much more likely to happen when I'm already stressed about other things in life, or when I'm sick, or when I'm overtired. It'll be louder, but I think it is attached to this state of vulnerability in the body that trauma responds to.
Mine would be a little different to that. Just listening to you and reflecting on myself. For me, I don't think it's hunger that I fear. When I'm hungry, that's not a stressful experience for me at all. But I think what I fear is deprivation. And that feels a little bit different. Physical hunger feels okay. I never had prolonged periods of physical hunger. And for me, my binge eating triggered off almost immediately as soon as I tried to ever diet for the first time in my life, because I'd never tried to deprive myself of certain foods before. But the minute I did, that was when like the complicated relationship started, and the thought of never being able to have something again, something not being available. So from a food scarcity point of view, I think if my brain perceives in a long-term way that something's not available or not allowed, that for me, I think is where my panic would probably come in. I don't know if I'd use the word panic, but my desire for those foods is really strong. I remember when I'd been binge eating for nearly a year, and then I developed bulimia, and I had an assessment with a psychiatrist, and she was going through all my history growing up and as a kid and all of this, trying to make some connections, because as far as I was concerned, I'd had a pretty good childhood. I didn't remember any challenges or a lot of challenging emotions or ever being restricted as a kid, none of that. But there was one thing that I said that she really hooked onto, and it was this idea. As a kid, I had a very sweet tooth, and Friday was sweet day. It never felt like this hard rule. If sweets became available outside of that time, it was okay. But the psychiatrist was very insistent that this must be the thing that had triggered off my whole eating disorder, because it was the sense of scarcity of only having it at a particular time. And I get how that could happen. But I think even in hindsight now, I feel like that was clutching at straws, because I don't remember it feeling like I can only have sweets on Friday. I just remember that that was
Yeah.
part of the routine.
Yeah. You've talked about that before. So I don't, I think you're like, no, this wasn't it. This wasn't it. That wasn't the, plus, I mean, it can't be the only it, because that happens. I think that I don't know any kid who hasn't had some sense of scarcity at some time, or something they weren't allowed to eat, or something they were, had at certain times, and it didn't develop into an eating disorder, or disordered eating, or prolonged senses of scarcity. But something about this discussion is like, it's interesting, the difference between night and day on it. Like when I'm hungry in the night, there's a much more fear. But in the day, like if I get hungry, or if you get hungry, how does your body respond to that? And how does your mind respond to that?
My body feels hungry. There's that kind of the physical sensations of hunger I don't find particularly uncomfortable. And my mind goes, oh, it's probably time to eat. If I feel hungry and dinner's a few hours away, I'll go and I'll grab something to eat. If I was out, for example, and I was feeling hungry and I couldn't eat for a couple of hours, that would feel okay to me. And I don't know that whether for you, whether that would be the same, or whether your nervous system is going, I really don't want to wait a couple of hours, because it's never I have to wait. I always can. If it's available, I'll get it. But if it's not, it's kind of okay.
I have more of a strong reaction. It's not a big problem. It doesn't create a binge situation, or like a panic in the day situation, but I don't like it. It's there's something about it that there's a reminder there of what that can turn into. And thinking about this and people who might be listening to this who are inside of still either the binge restrict cycle, a binge eating place, or in recovery somewhere, that it makes sense that the body and or the mind, and usually both, have some kind of sense of like around it. Like that the discomfort is like, don't. Because it's a warning sign that we're developed to have, to say like, go get food, you need to have food now. And if there has been prolonged periods of restriction, it's been coded as this sort of like uncomfortable thing. And I think for me, there is a conscious, I'm not comfortable with this hunger like for much longer. Like this is going to become my first priority. I need to go eat and then I can talk to you. I need to go eat and then I can finish this. And you need to, like, it becomes more and more uncomfortable to me to put it off. But I also think that this is, in talking to you, I just think that there's a part of that is also my particular system, like my anxiety. It drives it a bit, because the more nervous system work I do and the more ability I have to calm, I notice that I can influence it a little bit more. I've been using techniques to calm myself down on a more regular basis, and being able to, like even right now, like, there I go with my blah, 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 blah. And if I can slow down and calm it a little bit, suddenly that calm induces more of a sense of, we're okay. We can wait. But my default setting is like, and it sort of, I think that's because when you've got a state that's more prone to that anxiety, all of these things merge. I don't know that it's necessarily about the hunger itself. It's the hunger plus the anxiety.
Yeah. And I would predict or make a guess that the age that restriction or scarcity was around, I would have thought would have an impact.
Yeah.
So you were younger than I was when you were restricting. And I'm thinking now of clients and people that I've interacted with and spoken with who talk about the food scarcity that may have been there when they were a child. There was a genuine threat of having enough to eat, or even a kid who's put on a diet by their parents and that control has been put over on their food. All of this is going to create a sense of scarcity. And as our nervous systems are developing and growing, I feel like the seed gets planted deeper depending on where we might be developmentally too.
Yes, the brain isn't, and the nervous system, they're not fully developed at that time. So it's being wired in as something to be vigilant around. And I think that having this insight into the why and sort of the science of that and the biology of that is really helpful to reduce the shame, because it makes perfect sense why, as an adult, even though it's 30, 40, 50 years later, that there's still this feeling of, like, I need to not be hungry. Like, I need to fill up, which then can create if we don't really understand this, I think there's more of an instinct to overeat, because sometimes we're like, well, I shouldn't be hungry, or I shouldn't, like, I can wait. And then that scarcity gets bigger, and then we end up in a binge place or an overeating place. And then there's more shame around, gosh, I just can't control myself. So I might as well just stay full most of the time, because when I get hungry, I'm more liable to binge, or I'm more liable to eat too much and eat to discomfort. And really that is kind of that's not a gluttony issue. That is a biological defense issue. And I think when we know it and we can see it that way, it's like, oh, well, that actually makes a lot of sense. And it also gives me more to work with here. Because to me, again, it offers me that, oh, I know what's going on. I can see what's happening. What I need to do is calm down. What I need to do is remind my body that we are safe, and it's not, because it's running away with itself at that point. It's kind of going into that, like, wait, no, there's not a lot. And if we can slow that down a little bit and be like, oh no, food is here, food is available. Let me eat. I know why this is happening. This isn't a character flaw. I think we're more likely to be able to stay present with the food and maybe eat past fullness, but not going into a binge place.
If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode.
What would you say to somebody who is eating a lot prophylactically, who's frightened of being hungry So they find that they are eating a lot. So they haven't maybe experienced the physical hunger for years. There may be people listening to this that can really relate to this idea. I see that the levels of shame are so high because they're in this recovery community where people are talking about not dieting and not restricting, and they're thinking, well, I'm not restricting at all because I feel like I'm eating so much continually. They don't even feel like they are quote unquote real binge eaters because they might say, well, I don't binge, I'm just eating a lot, like very frequently, so that I don't even get close to it. Where do you start? I mean, I'm assuming you've seen this. Where do you start
Mhm.
with this?
Well, it depends, but one of the things that comes up is exploring what hunger feels like and kind of doing that on purpose. I think because when it's not something that you're doing intentionally, I think somehow that's more threatening. But if you're going into it sort of like facing it like, all right, I'm gonna get hungry. I'm gonna allow myself to get hungry here. I'm gonna notice when I'm going to eat and I'm not hungry and how that might be like a defense mechanism of some kind that's just so long buried that we're not necessarily aware of it. Let's explore what that is. Let's be like kind of a curiosity about that. And where's that threshold of I'm uncomfortable and now I'm so uncomfortable that I think I might binge. Like how long can we stay inside of this discomfort to explore what hunger feels like? Because what I actually find or hear and see a lot of the time is that sometimes when people are able to stay um to not eat prophylactically, there's a lot more food satisfaction. And there's a coming away of that felt so good. Like, I feel so good when I'm not overfilling or just, like, eating without feeling that hunger. There's, like, a wow kind of factor about that, and I just never allowed myself to get to a point where I would be hungry, so I don't even know what this feels like. I'm just used to being full. I've definitely worked with clients who've said, "I don't even know what it feels like to be hungry. I just am always putting something in before I reach that point."
It sounds like I'm just going to be parroting you probably, but I talk about maybe the goal right now is just to try to get in touch with your hunger, which is never to allow it to exist for any prolonged period of time, but trying to connect with what that might be. And the panic that some people feel and then the shame they feel for panicking about it can be huge.
Mhm.
Sometimes where I start is that in the morning, can you just check in and see if you can wait to get a physical sensation of hunger? And that might be quite scary for somebody. And then in the morning, they're trying to wait for hunger and you don't know when it's going to come. It can be really unsettling. But I agree, when we're doing something on purpose, it's a very different experience to when something's happening to us. There's
Yeah.
the choice, there's the empowerment part.
I think that's key almost because I'm thinking about if I'd had that assignment rather no. Yes. Okay. So if I've had that assignment, I would have looked at it like a chat, like, okay, that's my to do. That's something I can actively like check off my list. So there's something not scary about it because it's contained by that assignment or the therapist assigning me that or something like that. Like, okay, this person told me to, I'm reporting back in on this. So this is a whole thing. And that accountability would have been helpful. Whereas if it was just like, oh, I think I might, or if I wasn't aware of that, I would have started eating before I even allowed myself to get to that point because that fear comes so fast and it's so if you're not looking for it, you don't know what it is. You're just understanding that your body's like, no, no, no. And you just go eat. And it almost feels like that compulsion. And I think it's more a compulsion when you don't understand where that's coming from, because then you're just doing something without even knowing why. Um, and having no influence on that versus I know that I might expect some discomfort to come from the fear of being full. I can name that. And then I can watch for that. And then I can challenge that because I know what it is. So it's not going to overtake me without my awareness. And I think that's where my binge response would have kicked in is like, I don't know what's happening. Like, it's just so confusing and I don't get it. And it just overtakes me because of that.
And fear is right, isn't it? And I think when I'm sitting talking with a client about this thing that they're going to try this week, it can sound really doable. And there might be people listening to this that are hearing us talking about it and going, oh, yeah, I could try that. And I would just want to reassure anybody that if this feels really scary, not, I don't want to say that's okay, as in, because that experience is a really challenging experience to have. But what I see is people judging themselves for how big their reactions are. And that frustration that even though their rational mind knows that they are eating enough and that food is available, that this kind of seems to be working beyond rationality, right? Because it's
Yes.
so deep in us. I would really want to urge people to be really gentle with themselves about this. And if there are people around that can support you or things that you might be able to do, you don't have to sit there white knuckling it, just waiting for this
of course.
hunger to come, sitting in terror, right? You need that grounding, that sense of safety and being in the here and now. So just wanted to add that too.
Yeah. It's like that 2 tracks. It's like the intellectual cognitive knowing track. We assume that that's the real track, that's the reality. But your body is doing something on a different track. So you could know something here and your body's like, heck no. Like, I'm terrified. I know I shouldn't be, but I am. And I think that's what somatic work is about getting more in touch with that side of us that's giving us a message that doesn't make necessarily rational sense, but it's there. And we want to squash that, I think, a lot of times, because like that doesn't make sense though, because we're so used to valuing the cognitive. And so we're pushing down what the body's saying.
Yeah.
Why is the body saying this? Or not even why, but it is.
Yeah. I really like the way you put that. It's just making me think. I mean, I feel like I already knew it, but there was something that it just went in much with much more meaning when you said it then. This idea that we really do prioritize the cognitive. We think that that is the right thing, yet our emotions and our bodies are telling us something completely opposite. So our brain's going, no, this is right, and our bodies are saying something different. And it took me to, and I'll share this, and this isn't actually very easy for me to share, even though I'm quite honest and open on this podcast. But I will, because I think, I don't know, just maybe it might make people feel less alone. But I have quite a bad phobia of wasps.
Mm.
And it's really extreme. I can feel myself welling up just talking about it because it's big. I went on a retreat and we were doing this meditation, and a wasp came into the room. And I had been in this state of real bliss all morning. I'd been having such a good time and feeling so connected to myself and the world. And it felt like I could never have another problem again. It was a really amazing experience I was having at this place. And I'm sitting in this meditation, and this wasp flies in the room, and my whole body, nervous system is kicking off. And this, I can only describe it as terror takes over me. And I'm crying. Like, I'm in a meditation here, this guided meditation thing, and I've got tears streaming down my face, like snotty crying that I'm trying to do as quietly as I possibly can.
Hmm.
And then in my brain, the shame that descended for my reaction being as big as it was just, and I felt like in that moment, I just felt like a complete idiot. I thought just an hour ago, you're having this experience, yet look at you now. What on earth made you think that that was true? Like the thing that was an hour ago, you were just getting swept along with something because you're suggestible. I mean, it was just, and that shame lasted for hours before I came out of it. It really was. And I was talking with my supervisor a couple of days later, and I was telling her about it. I said, I still have the sense that I should be able to manage this reaction. And she reflected, because I'd been sharing something about a client, and she reflected, she's like, you've said to this client that they couldn't have done anything different in a particular situation. And I really believed it. And she said, yet you're saying to yourself, you should have been able to do something different in a situation. It's like, dang it, if you're going to talk sense, how am I supposed to argue with that? But it's still something I really find, because no one else in the room is freaking out. No one else. And that's what shame is. Like, it's that isolation of feeling like you're the only one who feels this big, this bad about something that your rational mind is saying it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I would just assume you were the only one in the room with a phobia of wasps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I shouldn't have a phobia of wasps.
But you shouldn't have a phobia of wasps.
Not that extreme, no.
Well, like as you're talking, I'm thinking this is bringing up we value this, right? That's what brought that on, that conversation of talking about how we value what we think rather than what we feel. And I think that we're brought up like that. And I can see that as a mom, because I guess when my kids have irrational fears, which they do, and my 8-year-old right now has an irrational fear of, I'm not even gonna call it irrational. It's just a fear she's got of separating from me for this reason that she believes, that something's going to happen to me. including if I walk the dog, she's got this thing happening right now. And I'm like, but Alex, like citing all the reasons, and I'm watching her understand those reasons. And she's just terrified anyway, and my instinct, because this was how I was received as well. And now I've internalized that. And also it's uncomfortable for me that she's uncomfortable, that, like, number one, it's uncomfortable that she's so scared. I don't like it. And number two, I can't go walk my dog. So my instinct is to talk her out of it and logic this through, and to get really frustrated that this is happening, and she's not listening to logic. And if I could continue treating it that way, and she would basically probably just do what I did and is internalize, like, this is wrong. This is a wrong way to be. And so I shouldn't. And so push it down, and then it will grow into something else. What I'm doing and trying really hard to do is catching that and not saying anything and not trying to talk her out. I mean, I'll use that a little bit because I think that our cognitive track is important also. It's just so important. I think that's the problem. It's like, okay, we've already spelled out the logic around this. Now I just sit with her on the bed and I hug her. And I hold her until she pulls back away, which sometimes takes a really long time. But I make sure, like, she's the one who's done. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, this is how that emotional track is seen and validated. And, like, it exists. So here's a hug and here's the comfort until you're ready and until that processes. And I think that that's a lot of what's missing. For sure, that was what was missing. And I think my parents' generation of parenting, it was a much more practical, like, hold yourself up by your bootstraps and move on, suck it up kind of thing, which I think is there was a lot of focus on the rational. And so this was the piece I think that got missed. And I think we need both. Once again, we need that side, but it's just, there's an imbalance of it. And I think that as adults now, for us to validate that emotional side, I wonder what might have happened if there was a part of you in that moment that was able to say, like, to hold you and hug you, in that moment, be like, I know that this doesn't make sense, but I know you're scared, and how that might have changed the shame that lasted those hours afterwards if this was something we had practice with.
I think that's really lovely, actually, what you do for Alex.
Yeah, when I can remember. I'm a big retroactive parent, so I'm like, oh shoot, I did that wrong. I'm like, Alex, wait. I'll sometimes say, can we do a do-over? Because I'm like, well, better late than never.
But that's a really important part. I mean, you say better late than never in that kind of throwaway way that we use that phrase. But so often I think, in the moment, even maybe our parents might have walked away and thought, actually, that wasn't great. And then, but let's forget about it and move on. Yeah. And I think the going back, it's not saving your kids from rupture or being missed or all of this. If you were the best parent in the world and you did everything right, they probably wouldn't cope with the real world. Yeah. That going back, I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that it's part of breaking generational cycles. It's like, I'm not getting it perfect the first time, but I'm willing to go back. That's a step beyond what my parents were able to do. And maybe however that moves down the track, you don't have to be perfect. But I think it applies also to us and our own self-compassion. So that's why if you've, berated yourself or shamed yourself or gotten upset with yourself about anything, whether it's hunger, like, I ate when I was hungry, I shouldn't have done that. The podcast suggested that I wait, like, whatever happens, it's like, you can still go back. Sorry, I did that wrong. Or let me try that again. And kind of be there for yourself in that moment too. I think that there's real value in that because it validates the experience, the original experience, instead of bypassing it and, like, shoving it under a rug. And I think that validation is really what a lot of it is about. It's just saying, like, I see you, or I felt that. And okay, I think that that's where shame lives, is where that never gets validated. And then we just assume that it was bad and wrong.
When you were talking then and you said, sorry, when you said, oh, I got that wrong, I'm going to do that again. I thought you were talking about, I was expecting you to start talking again. And you kept talking for a second. I was like, oh, and I what you were doing.
Oh, it's funny. I'm going to listen for that on the edit. So what are the beliefs that might be behind fear of hunger? Like, if I get hungry, then What is under that?
For some people, there won't even be a language for that because the belief developed outside of language at the felt and nervous system level. I think sometimes this is why we don't get to the belief because the rational brain almost stops it. Because for some people, it could be if I get hungry, I could die. And that belief, they wouldn't even,
Mm,
it's not easy to get to that belief because your rational mind is going to stop you from going
yeah.
there. But ultimately, with something like hunger, I think it can feel like a threat to your survival. You and I both know, like that moment before a binge, it feels like life and death. Nothing else matters at all.
Yeah.
So I think it really comes down to some kind of beliefs around survival for some people. For others, it might be a little bit more complex. It might be if I'm hungry, my parents will think I don't love them.
Mm,
So, for example, in a family where it's all about feeding and
mm,
food being shown as love, and you know, those situations of some families where it feels like you're eating in order to make the person who's
yeah.
providing the food feel
Yeah.
good and to get
Mhm.
that kind of approval and validation. So there could even be something around that, around never being allowed to be hungry in order to please whoever. So, I mean, based on what somebody's story is, what they understand about their story and the dynamics at home, oh, I mean, it could
Yeah.
be almost anything.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's a great angle of it to bring up because I think that exists for quite a number of people. I think another one is like if I'm hungry, I'll get out of control. And that can be based on actual experiences of, again, biologically driven of having been too hungry and then having that binge response. But then that's internalized as a character flaw. So we're like, if when I get too hungry, I will be that out of control person. Not that the biology is driving it, but that you're somehow responsible for that.
Yeah, and some of the messages in the recovery community really add to that. This idea of when we're talking about restriction leading to binge eating, I have seen that with people who are frightened of letting themselves get hungry because they then think that means it's inevitable they're going to binge if they're not eating
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah. Right.
And
Right. Like I
and
know I
gen-
don't want to restrict.
yes, yes. But I
Hmm.
find generally for me anyway, if I'm not eating enough and I'm getting too hungry, if I don't fight with that hunger, what happens is I just want to eat quite a bit more. But if
Yeah.
I'm not fighting with it, it doesn't turn into the compulsion. So it doesn't necessarily mean a
Exactly.
binge is coming just
Yes.
because I haven't eaten enough.
Yes. I have the same experience. If I get too hungry, I'll eat more than I'll eat past a bit past fullness more than I normally would. But it can stop at that, whereas it used to just catapult because it's like, oh, look what I'm doing, look what I've done, and the judgment just turns that into something totally different. Because it's quite normal for you to overcompensate when you've gotten too hungry if your body has felt that scarcity.
Mm, exactly.
Yeah. Or if I get too hungry, especially where food is that numbing agent, if I get too hungry, I'm going to start feeling, or I'm going to get uncomfortable, or sadness will overtake me, or anger, or whatever it might be. I think it's a cool exercise, actually, to think about what your belief is about what hunger would mean or would lead to and what we're afraid of there.
Mm. It's also making me think of an episode idea that you and I talked about at the very beginning and we never did. And it's around weight, this idea of, but what if I'm holding on to weight to be invisible?
Yeah.
So it could be that fear of hunger, could be fear of losing weight and the body being smaller. And this is not going to be for everybody at all, but there will be people listening to this for whom weight feels like a protective thing,
Hmm.
particularly people who might have experienced sexual trauma or something like that. It stops
Right.
me being sexualized or objectified in a particular way.
Hmm.
So there can be some safety in that as well that could come up. If people would like us to do that episode, let us know if there's a demand for it. I'm sure we
Yeah.
could.
I have a client who does not want a feminine body, does not want curves, does not want her breasts to grow, does not want hips, does not want that attention, and really struggles with the recovery process that is resulting in some weight gain that is adding curves to her body. This is inherently threatening. There's a real conflict between I want to recover and I know that I need to eat to recover, and that might involve the weight gain with I don't feel safe. That does not make me feel safe. So again, it's okay if there's conflicting needs. And I think the concept of and instead of or here, like this and this, what's here and what's in the body might be completely opposing, but they are both true.
Yeah, agreed. And of course, on the flip side of this is the fear of fullness. So that is going to be coming next week. If I think it's possible, definitely possible. In fact, I know it's possible to be afraid of both.
Yes.
So it might sound like the opposite, and you might think, no, I'm someone who's afraid of hunger and I'm fine with fullness. But we may challenge that.
Yeah.
Who knows? We haven't recorded.
Dun, dun, dun. Stay tuned for next week.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. See you then.
Bye-bye.
I think I really liked that episode.
I did too.